Afternoon, everyone. It's Nomsa here at Mkosi Talk Shows. Find your own voice, lead from within. With me today is Amanda Murray and Grant Morel and Nick Motichka. How are you guys?
All good, thanks, Nomsa.
Awesome. So our topic today, we continue with how to overcome childhood emotional neglect, part 2. Over to you, Amanda. We are on part 2 today.
Oh, I thought we were going to talk about AI today because of what Grant just was talking about on the weekend. Which one are we doing?
That's what we said that we're going to do part 2 last week.
Okay, but in our talk we said Grant talked about doing the AI stuff, but that's fine. We can do overcoming childhood trauma. Okay, so I think this is a really important topic because I think actually everybody has gone through some sort of trauma in their lifetime. And yet sometimes we view our childhood as this wonderful childhood. And yet when you actually really look back and you peel back the layers, there's definitely some trauma there. And I even like thinking about my students and what they've been going through. Every kid in the whole world has gone through trauma in the last 3 years because their childhood was disrupted by this pandemic and the different things that were put in place because of it. So we all are overcoming trauma in some way. The kids were afraid to hug their friends. Like this is the level of, and we know that touch is such an important thing for children. And we know that babies that don't get hugged have attachment issues as they grow older. And like even in the NICU, they actually have people that will go in and just hold and snuggle babies, because if they don't do that, then they have attachment issues growing up later on. And so when we look at our childhood traumas, we're peeling back the layers and finding out all of the things that could cause us attachment issues or relational issues moving forward. And it could be things that you like have brushed off and pushed down and suppressed that you forget about. And then it's not until somebody else brings it up that they're like, oh yeah, I guess I did have some childhood trauma in my life. So for example, I was talking with someone and they were saying like, oh, I had this like amazing childhood, blah, blah, blah. And I said, you had 2 addicts as parents and were sexually abused by an uncle. You did not have a wonderful childhood. In your brain, you have like suppressed that trauma and not dealt with it and need to go find some support for that. But you can't keep saying I had this wonderful childhood when you're not being real with yourself about what happened to you. And so that's the question that I have for people is sometimes people come, they're like, oh, I have this wonderful, or are you that person that said you had the wonderful one and are suppressing things? Or are you the person who's like, no, like things were a little rough, but you know what? People did the best that they could, right? And are you being real with yourself? Have you peeled back some of those layers? What do you guys think, Nick and Grant?
Over to you, Nick.
Yeah, I think that's interesting that you bring up that people have that tendency to minimize or almost forget about how they were raised and the different traumas and challenges that they had. And I think that's actually quite a common coping mechanism, is to, well, push that down, number one. And then those people have just found a way to survive and to grow up in that environment. And so they become really self-reliant and then push those memories away again. And then they've just figured out a way to do it. And they just move forward through life with that sort of an energy and just forget about all the traumas. And that for me was something that I definitely saw in myself with my PTSD. So just a little background if anyone listening hasn't heard already, but I was a police officer for a number of years and ended up with PTSD. And when I as my career kind of advanced, I knew that there was some calls and some different situations that were still lingering in my mind that I'd never dealt with. Anytime they would come up, I would just immediately like, nope, not today, sir, and just push that back down. And today's not the day to be thinking about that one. And that I thought was coping. And that served me for, well, a number of decades up until a certain point. And then that coping mechanism, I use that term very loosely because ignoring trauma is not coping, that's just surviving, and we definitely don't ever thrive when we're just surviving. And so I can see that in situations like the one you mentioned, Amanda, where people, they just push it down, then you become so good at pushing it down that you forget what has happened to you, and you ignore it to such an extent that I think a part of you actually forgets about it in a sense. And so it makes a lot of sense, but it is definitely a big issue in our world for sure. And I truly believe that trauma, unresolved trauma, is at the root of the majority of the issues that we see in people's lives and in the world today. And to find effective ways to deal with that is hugely important for sure. What do you think, Grant?
What do I think? Thanks, Nick. What do I think? I think absolutely there's trauma all around the world. And I mean, yeah, it's the definition of the word trauma, isn't it? Because if you're speaking in a modern parlance, trauma could be if you fell off your bicycle. You was traumatized out. In my way of thinking, that's not trauma. It could be if it was a really serious accident, but I certainly fell off my bicycle as a child several times, and I'm not traumatized by it. But there could be things that traumatize you. So it's where the sliding scale comes in. If a parent raised a voice at you, it can be seen as trauma. Yeah, I think my parents raised their voice at me a few times when I was naughty, and I probably deserved it. And I certainly wasn't traumatized by it. I can promise you that. Had it have been unfair, had it been excessive, yes, I suppose I would have been. But I wasn't. I was fortunate to come from a very loving childhood. But yeah, I mean, what I realize in my work is there's a lot of people, a hell of a lot of people going out there who are suffering, would be the word I would use. Whether it's trauma, the classification of trauma, whether it is stress, whether it is self-worth, all of the above, when one can come from the other and bleed into the other one, as we know, but they are suffering in some way, shape or form. Many of them don't realize it. Many people don't realize it, and it's affected the quality of their life, which saddens me. As a human behavior profiler as I am, I see it in people all the time in conversations. You catch it in yourself. You catch it in yourself, and you catch it in other things you say, and people become a little bit transparent after a while. And it's sad because everybody is a product of the childhood trauma and reward. Okay. So either if they had a bad time as a child, or they were rewarded for a certain thing, they will repeat it. I was talking to a colleague last night, and I was talking about somebody they know who writes, if someone's wronged him online, this person will write some very clever, sarcastic emails to big companies. Does it extremely well. Clearly gets something from doing that, right? And we all get, and this is all a product of a retaliation from something that happened when you're younger. So maybe that person was put down a lot when they was younger, put down by larger organizations or larger groups, and therefore, as got older, use their intellect and their skill to not let that happen again, and this is what people do. Quite often we will see, for example, we all have needs, and those needs are generally not what we actually are. Okay, let me rephrase it. They could be what we actually are, but not necessarily what we actually are. rather more how we want the world to see us. Okay. So, you know, the classic thing, you'll always hear someone always talking about writing an academic paper for this or that, or doing this or that. They have an intelligence need. You can see it in the clothes they wear, the things they choose to say, what they do, the things they bring up in conversation. It's an intelligence need. Now, it doesn't mean to say that person's unintelligent. It doesn't mean to say they are intelligent. It just means to say they have a need to be seen as being intelligent. Why? It may have been as a child they were not intelligent, or were told they were not intelligent, or were emphasized the absolute importance of being intelligent. So they developed a need to be seen as intelligent. And we do this in all forms of life. Trauma can bring these things about. It can be. So if you were bullied as a child, you may want to grow up to want to be seen as strong. You may go to the gym, get a whole pack of muscles and tattoos and a great big car, which is really saying, please don't give me any trouble. I've had enough of that. I don't want any more. But to stop that, you will put this big barrier, this defense mechanism to make yourself look tough. And you may become physically strong as a result. But really what you're saying is, I had enough of that. I don't ever want that to happen to me again. So everybody, as I've been taught by my great teachers out there, everybody's wearing a mask. And this can come from childhood trauma or reward. That's what I wanted to add. So you'll see it out there with everybody. You'll see the real person, and you'll see the mask that they're trying to project. Nomsa, what do you think about this?
Grant, when you say everybody is wearing a mask, yes, people, and also you spoke about the things like our behavior, the way we behave when it comes to intelligent or non-intelligence, is the voices that were spoken from our childhood. I think you are right, because everything we do in life, it has a voice. If your childhood is affected, when you become an adult, it's going to affect as well. Your adult life, you will be affected if you not deal with it, if it's not dealt with. So, and also you said many people, they don't realize they have trauma, and that is absolutely 100%. And we all wounded somehow, somewhere. We're all wounded, and that's why when it comes to relationship, I always say, like, when I meet people and they're like, I'm like, is there any problem you want to deal with before you go on dates? And they're like, oh no, me, I'm fine, I'm 100%. But because as a matchmaker, you don't have to argue with the client. You say, okay. But then when they go on dates, you get feedback, and the other person tells you why things didn't work out. And they're like, well, I spend all my dates with this person evening. They're telling me about the maintenance, how much their spouse pays for maintenance and stuff, or they're still not over their exes. Then when somebody gives them a feedback, and then that's when they agree to go for coaching, because we do provide coaching. That's when they realize actually they're still wounded from their past, because everything we do is either something that was spoken to us, and that voice needs to be silenced. And if it's a physical abuse, that physical abuse needs to be silenced. If we were told that we were not enough, like Nick grew up with amazing parents, and he decided, but there were things as well that he felt that his life wasn't fulfilled when he was older. And when he started working, he woke up and he was like, one day he was like, I don't want to be a policeman. You're making me a liar. So I think all those things is something that the beliefs that were attached to his own childhood. And then one day when he became to realize that actually, I don't want to be this person. I want to be the real me. And Amanda as well, you mentioned as well about the emotions. We suppress our own emotions. And we're not really, there are so many people that I've met myself, they tell me how wonderful they are, but when they start speaking, whatever comes in their mouth, it doesn't align with what they say they are. So you just have to, for me, basically, to be here today, there were some things that I had to identify from my childhood. My parents were not perfect. They all worked really hard, going and working away, my grandmother looking after me. So when I got older, there were questions that I was like, you chose money over me. And those questions, but I was lucky because I had to ask my parents. And my dad had to explain them, so I had to go and work away, even though they gave me an amazing childhood that everyone would think is amazing, even though I was happy. But when you get older, you start, when you search through your inner child, you start realizing that actually my childhood wasn't fulfilled. So it does happen. And also, Amanda, you talk about when we have parents that are actually addicts. And it does affect somebody when they are older, but people choose to actually ignore those feelings and you suppress them. For me, I've learned to face I call it my demons. I call it a demon. And I'm face your demon. And whatever the voice that is inside of me that is speaking to me, that it appears, I face it. And I had step parents. My stepdad was lovely, but my stepmom, there was this thing that I could see that she felt that my dad loved his children more than her, but that's not the case. So in the end, it will get all the talking and pushing away, but that wasn't the case. And then when I start asking the men, did you love us more than her? My dad will be like, no. But that's how she felt. So those are the things that for me as a child, as an adult, I had to deal with, having step parents, having my own parents. So but before I would suppress my feelings. The more I suppress my feelings, the more my relationship with the people that I meet, the more it affects me. Even in my intimate relationship, the more it affects me. So until I actually realize that I need to deal with me. And when I dealt with me, I realized that everything is like broken. The chains were broken. I didn't feel that I wasn't enough anymore. I didn't feel that I needed to follow the society. I didn't need that I needed to fit in with anybody. But before, when I make friends, I start speaking like them. I start walking like them. I start dressing like them. So those are the things that sometimes they affect. And I have a question for you, Amanda. How do we, if somebody has, where's my question? How do you actually find healing? How do you move on? Because you went through with your parents that were alcoholic. How did you find that healing for you to be here? How did you manage to heal yourself?
Well, I think so much of it is awareness. And one of the things that I've actually was just pulling up on my phone while I was listening, I was listening to a podcast. I've been listening to a number of podcasts while I work out at the gym each day. And so, and one of them, it's from Mark Groves. I don't know if any of you follow Mark Groves, but he's someone who talks about relationships a whole bunch, and he has a bunch of different speakers on his podcast, and he's from Canada too. So that's one of the reasons why I listen to him. But it was called How to Be a Better Parent, and the doctor was Dr. Shefali. And anyways, she's written a number of books, The Parenting Map, The Conscious Parent, and The Awakened Family. And what I loved about the podcast that I was listening to was that it said, in it, she said, you can look back on even your own parenting. And she's like, I messed up. And that awareness of like, I messed up, and you can actually start repairing your relationship with your children. And she's talking about how she has like a 20-year-old, and she's like, I have gone back and apologized to my child about different times that I was not aware of what it was that I was doing, or I was not aware that that was my trigger from my own childhood. And then I projected that onto you. And the more I become aware and the more I learn about myself, that allows me to then go back and have that conscious awareness with my own child. And so even though her child is grown, she's like, I'm still learning and repairing and recognizing my triggers, and recognizing like your child is going to be your biggest trigger probably, in as other than your like significant other, because they're the ones that are going to pull up all of those traumas or different things, those different sufferings that Grant was talking about, that trigger you, and then you react without thinking. And so then you can go, oh, what is it about this situation, if you are starting to become aware and conscious of it, that's causing me to react that way, or that caused me to react that way? How can I go back and now repair this? And so I was thinking, even the other day, I was triggered by like a friend canceling, and I was really upset and sad. And I was like, what is it about me that's causing me to be upset about this? Because this has nothing to do with the person canceling. It just was, I was looking forward to it and all of these things. And I was like, it could have just been the day and my emotions and anything. But I was like, there's obviously something about my childhood that makes me feel that when somebody cancels, or when they're not like putting value into this, that it somehow makes me not good enough. And I really like sat with that feeling of like, what is it about me that's causing this very simple situation that shouldn't be upsetting me at all? And I wasn't lashing out at the person for canceling or anything like that. I was like really sitting in my own emotions of what is it that's causing me to feel this way, and why, and what unhealed traumas do I have that are causing me to feel this way and be teared up over something so silly. and it was really like eye-opening for me to just like sit in that, like there's clearly some trauma that's being held based on this, to be so sad over something so simple that nobody else, like there, I'm sure there are other people, but in my head I was like, nobody else gets upset about this. And then I think for children too, like as we grow, we need to learn to advocate for ourselves as well, and say like, this isn't sitting well with me. And that's something really hard to do when you are little, right? And say like, start to stand up and speak for the needs that you have. And as teachers, we try to hopefully empower kids to be able to feel like they can step up and say something, and have safe adults in their life to be able to talk to. And they say sometimes like, you just need like 1 or 2 safe adults in your whole life that will allow you to feel safe and to be able to navigate some of those really hard, challenging times. And if you don't have that 1 or 2 safe adults, then we see more problems in children. But the biggest indicator of how your kids will turn out, based on the research that I've done, is who their friends are. And so if you're really worried about your kids, you really need to monitor who they're surrounding themselves with, because just as adults, who we are is a product of the 5 closest people to us. Well, it's the same for your kids. Who they are is a product of the 5 closest people to them. And as they grow, their friends are going to be the 5 closest people to them. When they're little, it's you. So that's just something to think about. What do you think, Nick?
Yeah, I think that's the awareness piece that you talked about is huge. And then that's awesome. Well, it's not awesome that you had that situation where you were disappointed because the person canceled, but I mean, good in the sense where you had that awareness of, okay, this is a little extreme. And then you sat in that. And I think that's something that I'm certainly working through on a daily basis as well. And that's that actually letting myself feel those emotions and actually working through it rather than just that push down tendency that I have, which goes back to my own childhood for sure. And I just heard someone speak the other day, and they were talking about how as humans we need 90 seconds apparently to like really sit in an emotion, negative ones in particular, and just really just feel it and let it work its way through you. And then after that 90 seconds, we can basically move on. But if you ignore that window, basically, you're just pushing stuff down, and that has a short shelf life basically, because you're not effectively dealing with anything by ignoring or pushing it down. And then I just wanted to talk about my own kind of experience with childhood emotional neglect. And I would say my parents, they did the best that they could, for sure. They did exactly what they knew and how they grew up. And I think we're just a product of the times as well. I mean, if you look back, we're all raised by people who were raised by people who were, going through the First and Second World War and dealing with traumas that we can't even imagine, and with complete unawareness, right? And this stuff wasn't talked about back then. And so they dealt with their own stuff in the way that they knew best, and that was to completely ignore it and push it down and drown it in alcohol and all of the things. And so I have no ill thoughts towards my own parents at all. They were simply doing the best they could. But yeah, I definitely didn't have my emotional needs met as a child, and it was only something that I recognized as an adult, and even into my probably mid 30s, and I'm only in my early 40s now. So it's only been a few years that I've kind of realized it. And for me, it was, number one was getting into a long-term relationship for the first time, seeing someone else's family and how they are, because we only know what we know, right? When you grow up, that is your existence. You don't know of anything else. And we as humans we have a really hard time putting ourselves in someone else's situation, like truly understanding what someone else has went through. It's just, for whatever reason, it's really hard for us to see someone's life from their own shoes. And so sorry, I totally lost my train of thought there. But I know I was talking about my own journey, and then, sorry. And so seeing someone else's family dynamic was huge for me. And then when I had my own kids, then that really is like, oh, wow, yeah, okay, there's a lot of things here that are undealt with. And you mentioned it as well, Amanda, is the kids are our biggest triggers and teachers, and I am dealing with that on a daily basis for sure. And it's hard, but it's so necessary for sure. And then I'll just kind of mention how my own story kind of unfolded in terms of my relationship with my parents. So I ended up choosing my career based on my wounded inner child, and that was to feel accepted and have my parents feel proud of me. And I thought going into policing, which was in the family, my dad was a police officer, would get me that, acceptance and that love and that I'm proud of you kind of moment. And so went into a career with that subconsciously. Of course, that wasn't anything I thought of consciously. So got into this career that I ended up not liking at all, which makes sense when you choose your career based on your wounded inner child, that it's not going to be something truly in alignment for you. And then so life happened. I end up with PTSD. I go off work. I end up finding a way to successfully deal with my PTSD and actually process those traumas. And for me, that was psilocybin, so psychedelic assisted therapy. And so I ended up going from severe PTSD to no diagnosis after one healing journey. And then that put me in a point where it was go back to work or else resign. And so I made the only choice for me, and that was to resign. And that was coming up on a year ago. And so once I resigned, I was asked to go on a podcast, and it was talking about a specific first responder podcast and talking about my story. And so I went on this podcast, and I'd never thought about this wounded inner child piece and how I chose my career based on that until I was actually live on this podcast, and it just came out of me for the first time. And so it was an amazing conversation, told my story, everything was good. And the podcast then came out, it was a couple of months later, so into kind of the summer of last year. And the day it comes out, for the first time, I'm like, oh, shoot, my parents are probably going to listen to this. And it was the first time I'd never had this conversation with them. Of course, that's not the kind of relationship that we have. And so there's nothing I could do at that point. And so this podcast comes out, and it was later in the evening. My phone rings, and it's my mom, and I'm like, oh shit, I'm in trouble. So I answer the phone, and so she said, first thing is like, so we listened to the podcast, and I'm like, okay. And it ended up, so it was the first time they'd ever heard that, obviously, from me, and the first time they'd ever thought about it. And it's crazy way to this whole full circle thing. So she ended up telling me that, well, they both did, my mom and dad, that they were proud of me. And it ended up being like an actual quite beautiful moment. And it's crazy to think about. So yeah, I chose this career to make them proud of me. Never got that through the career. Went through it all the trauma, everything, finally resigned, and then talk about my inner child stuff and just speaking my truth and giving my whole story and sharing it with the world in the hopes that it would help someone or resonate with someone or give someone, a piece of information that might help them. And that was the part that ended up getting me what I was looking for even as a child. And that was that I'm proud of you moment. And so it's kind of a long story, but it's kind of wild how life works. And for me, it's just a reminder of that, how important it is to just speak your truth, because there's just nothing else as important as your truth. And even though it's hard, and even though you might think it will have negative repercussions, hurting other people's feelings or whatever, it's quite the opposite in my experience, for sure. And so yeah, that's what I wanted to say for now. Over to you, Grant.
Thank you, Nick. And what a wonderful story. What a great story. And it highlights so many important points, I think, really, because yeah, you're right. Many people in life, what they really want is to be hugged and told they're appreciated. And I think as people in business, we can often forget that with our staff. I was talking to my neighbor the other day, and I said that they remembered years ago talking to someone. It wasn't a neighbor, actually, it was someone around the corner. And they were saying that they had a boss who was fantastic. They'd always come in, always make eye contact with a person, sit there and talk intently with them, maybe for 2 minutes. But 2 minutes. But tell me about that project you're working on. You're doing a fantastic job. I really appreciate it. You've got a great way of doing that. You do it. And then other people would be wanting their attention, but they wouldn't look at them. And then when they finished, they would go there and spend a dedicated 2 minutes, I say 2 minutes, thereabouts, with the other person, being so appreciative and attentive, and managed the team beautifully. Why? Because they gave appreciation. Because I think that I'm certainly not going to give any parenting advice to people, but if they, if you think about it, if you do appreciate your kids, if you do show the love to them, they're less likely to want to have to go on an alternative route to win that appreciation, which means you will help them get to their truth quicker, which means it will help them to live the life that they want, not the life that they do to try to get what they feel they deserve in terms of affection. So the more affection we can give children, and I think it extends way beyond children, it's to each other. The more appreciation we can, okay, I don't mean if someone's doing something very bad, say to them, oh, you're wonderful. I don't mean that. But look for the good in people. Try to find what's good, because if you can emphasize the good in people, quite often they may start dropping what's bad, because sometimes people do bad things to get that attention. If you do the good, the bad things become redundant, and therefore they just continue doing good things. It's not going to work out exactly as perfect as that, of course, but as a generalization, I think is a good way to go. So the question for all of us is, are we showing enough appreciation for other people? Are we saying thank you? Are we going around saying the good things? And then for the receivers, are we good enough at receiving compliments? Because it normally goes like this, doesn't it? Oh, I really like those shoes you're wearing. Oh, they're just cheap, they're just rubbish, I just put them on. I really like your shoes though. That wasn't the idea. The idea was that someone was saying, I genuinely like your shoes. I like your hair, or I like the way you said that, whatever it was. And you should just say, oh, really? Oh, thank you very much. Thank you. I appreciate that. Accept that compliment. Be good at taking compliments and be good at giving them. But because someone gives you a compliment, doesn't mean to say you're obliged to give one back to them. Maybe if there is a genuine need to do that at that moment, do it by all means. If it's another day, do it, but make it genuine. But most of all, be willing to praise others and be willing to be praised. And I think if we do that, our heart's in a better place and we stop chasing rainbows. That's what I wanted to say. Nomsa, over to you.
I love that, Grant, that we don't, sometimes some people don't praise their children. And also you talk about seeing good in people. And I think it's very, very important when you see good in people, not like what we were talking about. Remember when we were talking about the meeting the other day, and I was like, and he was like, Nomsa, how are you gonna make money with Nkosi talk shows? And I was like, we're not going there. So I was like, these speakers have been there. They've been with me through thick and thin. So, and you were like, do they actually know this is how you feel? And I was like, I'm not sure if they do. But we've been together through, that's the conversation we had with Grant. And he was like, you need to take 20% off them. I was like, no, I won't do that. I can take 20% off anybody else, but not from these people, because they've been with me through thick and thin. There were times where I felt like giving up, but they were just there with me. So I was like, I'm not going to do that regardless of the situation. Only if we become billionaires, maybe I will start asking them to donate the money to charities. So I agree with you, Grant. You have to see good in people, because when you see good in people and see good in your own children, it's like I think my drive that drove me to become the person that I am is like my dad and my stepdad. They're so good in me that sometimes I just look back and I'm like, why did they trust me to make decisions? But sometimes you have to see good in your children, because that it helps them become who they want to become. My daughter, she's a child that is very intelligent. She was born like that. But there are times where sometimes when things get hard, she wants to give up. But I always tell her how much I'm like, I'm praying for you. I'm praying for God to help you through these challenging times. But all you got to do, you just have to believe that you can be who you want to become, because I can't help you. So I always make sure that I say good in her. Whatever I see good. And also the energy helps our children as well to become who they want to become. And Nick, as well, you mentioned that you spend all these trying to please your parents and choosing your career because you wanted your parents to actually you wanted them to actually see that you chose your career through your wounded childhood, wanting them to be proud of you. but deep down in your heart, they were already proud of you because you didn't know. So they saw you as somebody, their son, that is actually amazing. But sometimes we don't know all those things. That's why it's very, very important to ask questions. And also, like we were talking about different cultures the other day, Indian cultures is like that. And African culture is like that. You have to become a doctor when you're older. You have to become a lawyer. You have to become an engineer. You have to become all these high-end jobs. You have to become that. If you don't become that, parents have to be proud. They will tell you that our neighbors, they are this, so you got to be better than that. So they are not afraid to speak, say how they feel. But then when you get older, that's why so many people, they start degrees, PhDs, that they really don't use them, because it's never them who chooses those careers, is the parents. So those are the things, they are the things that play a big part in our society. And also, Amanda, you mentioned that for you to be where you are today is the awareness, being able to recognize the triggers and monitor, also monitoring your daughter. You mentioned your daughter, that, or your children, who they are surrounded with, that plays a really big part in their lives. I think you are right as well. It's very, very important for children to monitor your children. I always, whenever I talk to my friends, like when my daughter was growing up, my oldest one, I always say to her, please, if I leave you with my daughter, make sure she watches film her age. And I was like, and she was like, what is wrong with you? Why don't you just let her do her thing? I was like, a child has to grow up slowly. And for me to let my daughter follow the world and watch things that are really older than her, what am I teaching my child? So I was like, she needs to get older step by step. And also with the friends that she hangs out with, is the friends that the parents I hang out with as well. So I know them and they know the other parents as well. So they have this environment where some of them come from a wealthy family, some of them come from this family, but the good thing is they know their friends and they know they love each other. And even with the studying, when they're studying, if you see them now, they're preparing for GCSEs, they live together on the iPad. They're doing studying and correcting each other. They're helping each other out. It's not that this one is better or I'm better than you. They're just there to help each other out. And I think that is very, very important. And like Nick, when you mentioned that parents, when in their generation, our parents, they were like alcohol, ignoring all this. Sometimes our parents went through abuse to our forefathers, and because sometimes you don't speak in that generation, they were not allowed to speak. Sometimes they will say cause shame to the family. So they had to put up with their marriages. They had to watch their parents putting up with things, abusive fathers or abusive mothers. And then when we were born, we had to go through all that, the feelings, the emotions. Some people had to go through it. And like Amanda, she's saying that, but sometimes, like, look at you. Your parents went through like alcoholic parents, but you chose to be the person that you are today. And it shows that our childhood does not define who we are. Over to you, Amanda.
Can I just jump in really super quick before Amanda does and just say, I love what you said there, Nomsi. You made a lot of great points there. And of course, as we're saying, communicating that appreciation, what you started off by saying, is so important. And context of it is the key thing. Like what you said, we had that conversation because a lot of people wasn't aware of what your vision was, and it is that communication. So, and by the way, when I said about the 20% people, it wasn't quite as draconian. There was context around where that would come in, etc. But but it is explaining that fully. And once you explain it and the appreciation of where things fit in, and that's when it comes to mapping this over from trauma into a business. When you take today's subject into a business, it is understanding the mission, the vision, where the long-term plan is, because then it's easier for everybody to understand. And that then maps back into people's emotions from business and in their personal life and in childhood. Once you understand the context behind something, it's very much easier for people to understand and feel that appreciation. And therefore people buy into whatever it is at that point. And that's never been more prevalent in families. So that was a nice point, well made there. Thank you. Amanda.
I really love Nick's story about how like you were worried almost that they were going to hear it and then like lash out at you, and the complete opposite happened. And in some cases that does happen. Your parents obviously have that awareness so that they are able to actually like think about it and then approach it from a different way rather than react. Not every parent is at that level of awareness, and if you had different parents, they might have reacted differently, but that's okay because you spoke your truth, right? And I think that's something that we want people to be aware of too, is that even if you speak your truth and you're honest and you're conscious and you're aware, it doesn't mean that the other people are going to respond the way that you had hoped. And that's okay too. That's their own stuff. And then I was thinking too about what Grant just said about, and I was thinking about how people who are struggling are people generally who will hurt people in general. And so like hurt people. And it's something that I just was talking about with some students yesterday, is because there are some not nice things going on in my classroom. And we talked about like the strategies that you can have to deal with if you're hurting. Lashing out at somebody else isn't necessarily the best way to do it, but we know that it is because of something that's hurt deep inside. And so I really try to be conscious of, if somebody does something not nice, like what is it within themselves that is hurting? Because if you weren't hurting, you wouldn't lash out that way, right? If you weren't triggered, you wouldn't lash out that way. You'd be able to step back, take a deep breath, and respond rather than react. And so, Nick, in your story, your parents were able to respond, and it was a really positive outcome. And I think that's very, very beautiful. And we hope that more and more people will start to be able to respond in a conscious and loving way. Not every time is that the case, but we can always hope for that, right? I do have to get going because we're on a time change here, but in the UK we're not. So I'm going to say bye, everyone, and have a wonderful.
Do you want to say your words of encouragement, Amanda, quickly before you go?
Well, that was kind of mine. Just like I hope everyone has hope that even if somebody reacts the way that we don't want, that there's hope that eventually there will be awareness at some point in time. And two, that whatever childhood traumas you are holding on to, that you start to seek out support, or even start journaling. That could be the very first step, or start maybe approach going to a specialist, a psychologist, or a counselor, or a coach, or something that will truly be that first step in growth for you, and that first step in awareness and consciousness. But I do have to go. Have a wonderful day, and I will see you guys next week.
Bye, Amanda. Say hi to Ellie. See you soon.
Take care, Amanda. Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Wow.
Are you okay to stay till Nick?
I'll give my words of encouragement. I got to run too. I got to help get the kids off to school here as well. But yeah, I think for me, just to kind of wrap it up, is that speaking your truth piece is like, that's the only thing that you can control. You can't control other people's reaction to that. And just speaking from experience, having, kept that truth inside of me for so many years, and then finally, in later life, in my middle ages, I guess, finally expressing that to the world, and all of the positive response I've gotten, and even just how I feel like after every morning, or after every Wednesday morning for me, speaking on in gossip talk shows here, I always feel so much better. I always have a really good day after these conversations, and I think it's a large part to do with just the truth and the authenticity and the real conversation, as opposed to that surface level stuff that we're also accustomed to in our day-to-day lives. And I just think it's so important to have a place to have these conversations and to be able to speak your truth. And then just one other thing, I'll just kind of an interesting thing that I realized growing up, and that was, so looking back at the previous generation, so my grandfather in particular, he would never say anything positive to that particular grandchild about that grandchild, but when we were around him, he would always be praising the other grandkids and talking about how amazing they were, and then having a conversation with my brother, and it was the same thing for him, but he would be praising, me or some other grandkid, but never directly to the child. And it was just an interesting realization. I think that's a generational, I'm not sure, undealt with something or other, that they don't feel comfortable or don't directly face to face give that praise, which I think it's an opportunity missed, because it definitely lands praise direct right to that child, rather than coming through a cousin or a brother or whatever. And so again, just speaking your truth. And there's an example of someone, my grandfather, who didn't speak his truth, and that that connection that we could have had was lost because of his inability to I guess express his emotions directly to the person. And so at the end of the day, I just think, speak your truth and acknowledge what you're going through, and allow yourself to go through it, and to seek out different for everyone, of course, but different avenues to get your truth out, whether that's to a psychologist, to a friend, on a on a weekly talk show, whatever that looks like for you. I just think it's really important. So thank you very much. And I appreciate you guys' time and attention, and we will see you all next week.
Thanks, Nick. Have a lovely week. And the kids.
Bye-bye.
And the wife.
Thank you.
Bye.
Fantastic.
Yes, Grant, what do you think about what Nick just said?
It's interesting, isn't it? It's a fascinating point. The person he was referring to didn't give advice directly, or didn't give praise directly to someone. Again, that's a product. I mean, that doesn't sound that normal, but then again, it's normal to that person for a reason. There's a reason. There will be a reason behind that, which doesn't help the kids, I know, but that person was once a kid. That person was once a kid, and there's a reason that it doesn't give praise directly, I'm sure. It may sound alien to you, it may sound alien to me, but it was logical to that person. Now, again, it's about if we can recognize this in other people. And when people annoy you, they do things that annoy you. And these days, I always try to think, why is someone doing that? Because their behavior is irrational. Their behavior is not normal. Are they deliberately? This is so intention is a big word in my vocabulary. It's about, is that person intending to wound you? If so, that's annoying. But is that person doing it for their own defense because they feel they need to do that because of either what they feel of you or someone before has done to them, and they think, oh my God, I'm going into a similar situation. They need to defend themselves. Is that person wounded, or are they just trying to wound me? Is what I ask myself. And if they're wounded and it's nothing to do with me, it just happens to be that I happen to be there at that moment, and it's not personally directed at me, I try to see if I can unravel that person, make them feel more comfortable, make them feel safer, so that they effectively drop the crap. Drop that nonsense, just drop that crap and just be a real, honest, nice person, because they don't need to be fearful, because people aren't trying to trip you over. People aren't trying to stitch you up. People aren't trying to embarrass you as much as people think. That's the good news. There will always be the odd individual who does. And I would say, ask yourself that question of them. Are they trying to wound you, or are they wounded? If they're wounded, try to deal with that wound, and they don't need to start trying to wound other people so much. It's about making people feel safe, feel appreciated, feel loved. When they do that, the toughest, most nastiest people quite often can be okay. There are exceptions, of course, there are exceptions. And I always try to cross that list off first before I take someone to task. I always try to help them first. Sometimes people do need to be taken to task because you crossed all the bridges and they're not responding, or they don't want to respond. Okay, then I've done what I can ethically, and then I need to take them to task and say, hey, hang on. But I think if we could all pause and take a higher road on this and try to think, put our emotions to one side, our ego to one side for one moment, and try to think, what's the other person going through? Because their behavior is not normal. So what's caused them to be like that? They must be suffering, feeling some sort of anguish inside. Let's see if I can help them with that. And if I can, the world becomes a better place. And that's my thought. That's my thought on it. Yeah. And if we all went around life trying to do that, I think it would make quite a big impact.
Yeah, that's true, Grant. Some people, when they are wounded, they will try to wound other people instead of dealing with whatever is going on in their lives. And I think what you're saying is very, very important. When somebody sees that life is not working out, that moment, just to work on yourself. And instead of trying to wound somebody else. I see that at work as well. In the office, it just happens. Sometimes you see other people, they're walking in and they're not happy because something at home is not right, or something within themselves is not right as well. And they'll try to take it on other people. So I always try to just keep myself away from that kind of a situation. And also what Nick was saying, like what you're saying, that his granddad might have a reason. That's what the grandfathers does. They believe that they're toughening you up. They're toughening you up, and they'll be talking, that person is amazing. But when you come, they're just like, they're not really nice to you. Unfortunately, I have soft grandparents. So my grandparents, they're just like, they're nice people. And even with the kids, like when we raise kids, you'll find that parents have their favorite children. And that affects other children as well when they are older. I don't have, because I was aware of it when I was growing up, my siblings thought my dad was my favorite. I was my dad's favorite. But then when I started explaining that, no, I wasn't my dad's favorite, is because I'm so curious. I like to ask questions. So I used to hang out with my grandmother. I used to hang out with my dad a lot, or with my mom. So that's when they realizing, when I explained that I was never the favorite, it's just I just like to ask questions. I like to hang out. And because my siblings felt that way, I always make sure with these two kids that I have, I don't have a favorite. I love both of them the same. And although when they are arguing, Hope goes, I was born first. I had to have my mom for many, many years before you were born. And this one goes, no, you're not. You are not the favorite. I'm the favorite. So it's nice to see them arguing about it, but knowing that, and then I have to step in and say, kids, I don't have a favorite. I love you guys both the same. So it's nice to see them and communicate with them when they're growing up, knowing that mommy hasn't got a favorite child. And also speaking your own truth. Nick and Amanda mentioned speaking of your own truth. I think is very, very important as well to actually speak your own truth. And just, if you have any questions with parents, if they're still living, try to ask questions. And if you don't get the answers that you want, it does not mean that we have to understand the wounds. We have to understand that our parents are wounded as well, the same way that we are, and try to have mercy. And when I was talking, I had a chat with one of my clients once, and she was telling me that her mom is this, and I was like, have you ever thought that your mom, she's wounded the same way? Maybe there are some things that she has not said to you. Mostly happens when you have rich fathers. The rich fathers, some of them become selfish when it comes to wives. Most African ones and the Indian ones, they become so selfish that as a wife, you do as you're told. If I give you money, so you cannot demand any more from me. That's what attitude that Africans have, that if I find a wife and marry them, put a ring on them, and if I'm rich and I give them money, they cannot ask no more, so I can do whatever I want. So that's what happens, and it does affect the children. So I was like to my clients, don't you think your mom is going through the same thing that you're going through? Because her dad wanted her to be some kind of something, a lawyer or something, or graduate university. She didn't want to do all those things. So I was like, don't you think he has the same expectations with your mom, and there are things that she's wounded and she's not talking about it? And then a few weeks later, she comes back and she was like, yeah, you were right. Now that I've left her alone, she's starting to open up. So sometimes that's what we all go through because of other people's wounds and that have not been dealt with. So Grant, do you have any words of encouragement before we go? And also tell our audience who you are and where they can find you, please.
Yeah, thank you, Nomsa. Yeah, I think the words of encouragement are, it's easier to avoid a problem in the first place than it is to fix one. So therefore, go out there. Physical contact, I think was said earlier in the show by yourself, is so important. When it comes to childhood trauma, hug your kids, kiss your kids. You show your appreciation. If you tell them you love them, love them. If not, at least show it so that they can feel it is important. Certainly do that. Physical contact's important. And don't just reserve that for kids. Reserve that for your family, friends. And when I coach people, one of the things they do every morning is, what can I do for another person? What is something nice I can do for someone? And expect nothing in return. Now, whether that means just phone someone up and say, hey, thanks for that. That was really nice you did that. Or, hey, just checking in to see how you are. Or just make that person a cup of coffee. Whatever it is, just something small. Just do something nice to show appreciation for other humans, for your kids, for other people. And of course, don't forget to appreciate yourself too. If you do that, it can stop a lot of these problems occurring in the first place. That's my words of wisdom. That's my words of advice and encouragement. My name's Grant Morrell. I'm an international speaker, coach, trainer, and an international best-selling author. Over the past 20 years, myself and an international team have helped thousands of entrepreneurs, business owners, organizations, and individuals across 15 plus countries. Help them in their business to increase their profits by up to 200%, often much more, in just a few short months by working with the team. And I use that word loosely because everybody actually does have a team, and I can talk another time about what I mean by that. Your team, your systems, your mindset, and your strategy, so that you can live a life of passion, purpose, and freedom, and develop a business and a lifestyle that becomes a legacy for generations to come. That's me. Over to you, Nomsa.
It's it, Emma. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Grant. And we are here at Ngozi Talk Shows Monday to Friday, 1 p.m. UK time. And for those who don't know me, I am Nomsa, your love harmonist. And I'm just going to put the website there. If you guys are looking to connect with me, please do so by going to www.hseia.com and you're looking for love. And at Ngozi Talk Shows, we help you guys find your own voice, lead from within. And we are here Monday to Friday, 1 p.m. UK time. And if you're watching us on YouTube, please subscribe to our channel and be part of the family. And Ngozi Talk Shows, like our page and become part of the family. We have Ngozi Talk Shows group, and we have Unique Billionaire Mindset group. So you can join all those groups and become part of us and live with grace, everyone. And God bless.